now that we have our ship moving and our ship destroying, now we need to add some kind of effects to make it look, I don't know, fancy, cool, like a moment. And we're going to add an explosion effect for when our ship collides with something. It'll instantiate an explosion, kind of like what we did with our bricks, but we're going to do it a slightly different method this time. We're going to animate using a sprite sheet. Now, on your Google Classroom, I have on your resources, I've added an assignment called 2D Explosion Sprites, which if you click on it, it'll take you to a Google Drive folder, which has 3 folders in it. It's got a folder that if you go into this, you should use the auto slice function, which we'll talk about. We've got a folder for 32 by 32 and then one for already sliced. So, for example, the one I'm going to be using, I believe, is this one right here. It's one picture that's got several sprites on it, and each sprite is a 32 by 32 square, so I know that that's what I'm going to use for that. There's some that I have that I got from Kinney, I believe, that are already split up, very different looking things. They're just coded by what type of color they are. And then an auto slice one, which has all kinds of different ones. These are from Kinney, I think, as well. So whichever ones you want to use, or if you want to find your own, you can always go to Google and search for 2D Explosion Sprite Sheet. A sprite sheet is just a collection of images all put together. You'll see at the top here we've got some of our favorite places. Open Game Art is on here. There's another Open Game Art. Watch out for Pinterest because those will often take you to like websites that don't exist anymore. But yeah, Open Game Art looks like there's a bunch here. So if I were to click on this, oh yeah, lots of stuff. So there are all kinds of different animations. So if you want something like this, it's here. It's just like a little explosion that kind of circles out and so on. So whatever you want to use, that's up to you. Explosion sprites I've collected for you are on the Google Drive under the explosion sprites, but you can always search for your own assets. Just make sure they are free to use for your project. I have already gone ahead and added mine, and between last video and this video I did make a sprites folder and then actually organize all my stuff that I've pulled out of my stock folder. That way I don't have to worry about any of that stuff anymore. So for our making of our sprites, you can either get the individual ones that are already sliced, or if you get one of these sprite sheets, I'm going to show you how to split it apart into different images and then use those images to create an animation. So I've got my sprite imported. It's got all of my pieces for my animation, and then I'm going to come over and go to Sprite Editor. Actually, I'm going to change, at the top here, it says sprite mode. I'm going to switch that to multiple. If that's not showing up for you, make sure your texture type is listed as Sprite 2D and UI. Sometimes it imports slightly differently, so make sure your sprite mode is set to multiple. I'm going to go to Sprite Editor. Oh, I have to apply the settings. There's down there at the bottom. And this is the Sprite Editor window. It's not very robust. It doesn't have a lot of options, but that's okay. I don't need it to have a bunch of options. I'm going to slice it. And slicing it means turning it into separate individual pieces. Right now, it's going to do it automatically, and it's going to set the pivot point to the center, and that's okay. I could do that. But I could also, so if you're using a sprite sheet that says that you need to do an automatic slicing, basically your sprites aren't perfectly neatly gridded, then you can use that. You can also do by cell size. And I know that this particular sprite sheet, I believe, is 32 by 32. I'm going to leave my pivot point to the center because I don't need to set that to anywhere else. That probably basically just means that it will rotate around the center of the picture. If I set it to the bottom left corner, it would rotate around the bottom left corner. But center is fine for me. So when I hit slice, you can now see, it's kind of hard to tell with the transparent background, but there's these little lines that show where it's cut, which is great. And then I'm going to hit, after I've double checked that those lines are where they need to be, I'm going to hit apply. And it's going to come up with this. It's asking me to name it and whatnot, and I'm not worried about it. So that's fine for me. I'm going to go ahead and close out of this. You can see underneath of my image now, I have a bunch of individual pictures generated from this one sprite. That's why it was set to multiple. Now my sprite has multiple pieces. Next thing we need to do is we need to create an animation. So I'm going to grab just the first piece of my sprite into my scene here. I'm going to go up to my window and go to animation and click on animation to bring up the animation window. I'm going to put this in the same spot as my console because I don't need to look at my console right now, and it's a good open space for me to work with. And real quick, before I do anything else, in my assets folder, I'm going to create an animations folder because I need to have somewhere that I'm going to save this animation, and this seems like as good a place as any. I'm going to drag from my hierarchy this picture down here, I think. Oh, nope, never mind. Hit create. New animation, save as, and where. So your window should look a little bit more like this. It's asking you where you want to save it. Make sure you save it in your animations folder. It'll start out in your assets, so that's fine. Just make sure you click on animations and call this ship explosion anim. Anim is a common term that a lot of people use with anime that Unity that tells the person using it that it is an animation. So I'm going to click and select everything in here from 0 through 5, and I'm going to drag it in here. Now if I hit play, you can see this right here. So I'm going to click. Actually, I'm just going to zoom in. It's going very, very fast, right? Okay. So let's check my samples. This is the speed. It's basically running at 60 frames per second. Let's set this down to 10. Now I typed in 10 and I hit enter. That looks much more reasonable, right? A little less silly. Let's take this. You can see my sprite renderer. Whenever I hit play, you can see it running through the sprites. So that's great. I'm going to change the scale of this to, let's say, 4. It's much bigger now. Yeah, much bigger. I want it to be nice and big so it'll cover up the whole ship. Let's drag it kind of down towards our ship to kind of judge the size. Yeah, that'll probably be all right. All right. So I've created an animation. I'm happy with the 10 speed. Yeah, pretty happy with it. So if I want to look down here, the animation that I created is right here. It's the ship explosion animation. It's there so I can double check on it if I want it. So yeah. What I need to do now is I need a way to make it so that whenever my ship runs into something and explodes, before it implodes, I need it to create this animation and play it on my screen. So we're going to need to open up our script that we just were working with last time, where we added our audio clip. Right after our audio clip plays, we're going to go ahead and create our explosion animation as well. Okay, everything kind of popped back out, so I'm going to go ahead and minimize the stuff I'm not working with right now so I don't have all that on my screen. So at the header, in effects, because we're creating a new effect, I'm going to serialize a field because I need to be able to drag it in. This one is going to be of type GameObject, and it is going to be called Explosion FX because it makes sense to me. And right after, down here in our coroutine, after the audio source is instantiated, we're going to create our explosion effects. So we need to instantiate, and then in parentheses, what are we instantiating? The explosion effects. Where are we doing it? At transform.position. And at what rotation are we going to instantiate it? And we're going to instantiate it at transform.rotation. Now, for mine, that doesn't necessarily matter because my explosion is a perfectly circular explosion, but it might look weird if the one that you have is not that way at all. So let's go back into Unity. Okay, now we're looking for an explosion effects game object. So if I click on this, I'm going to double check my stuff. I think what I need to do is I need to go ahead, what I have not done yet is I need to prefab this, which has the animation on it. And I'm going to put it in, should I make one for effect? I'm going to put it on player, because for now, this explosion is essentially just a player effect. And now that it's down there, I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. Alright, so now if I go to my player, and it's looking for a game object, now I want to drag in, actually, I'm going to rename this while I'm here. Sorry, apparently I'm a little scattered today. Ship Explosion FX, seems like a good name. Yeah. Yellow player, Ship Explosion FX. Apply that back to the prefab. Let's see if it works. I hit play, and I go forward. It does work, but it instantiates it behind my player. So let's look at this. And the sprite renderer, sorting order, order and layer. So let's set this order and layer to like 10. 10 would, like, the higher the number, the further forward in its location it should be. So let's try that and see if 10. Yeah, there we go. Now it's happening in front of my ship. Very nice, very nice. All right, so that is animation in a nutshell. If you picked up a set of sprites that everything's already cut apart for you, perhaps you're using the ones that's already sliced in the asset folder, you don't have to do the part where you use the slicer. You just grab all the sprites and grab the first one, put it up here, and then create an animation with it, and then add all your sprites to it. It's very similar to what I did. It's just you skip a step, basically. And then the only other difference is if you have a set of sprites where the size isn't consistent or they are arranged in a weird way, you can use automatic slicing to make that work. But either way, as long as you have an animation, then you are golden. We are going to be animating several things. We'll probably add a different type of effect for our comets exploding. We'll probably add, we'll definitely be adding an animation that shows when our player is moving that kind of makes it look like the thrusters are firing to make it have a cool dynamic effect that shows when the player is pushing an input button. So that's what we're going to be doing with animation. Now that you've done it once, it shouldn't be too hard to do it for other things. Next, we need to add some, now that we've kind of got our player all fancied up, we'll work on our comets a little bit to make them breakable and make them break into smaller pieces, and perhaps we'll also do some bullet shooting. So that's all stuff that we have to work on to do our core concept for our game. We did do a little bit of secondary stuff, but it is kind of nice to have a bit of polish on our game before we go into the final stages.